get started with our next session in the SDG Media Zone. If we can quieten the room, I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Ian Phillips, who heads our News and Media Division here at the United Nations. Ian, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, and good morning, everybody. Delighted to be on stage today with Skau, the Deputy Executive Director of the World Food Programme. Carl, could you give us an overview, a general overview of the state of the world and the problems that you're facing as we talk about ending global hunger by 2030?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Ian, and thank you for inviting us to this important venue at UNGA Week. I think, you know, we are really in exceptional times. I was reflecting coming in here that this is probably my 15th UNGA. I came here the first time in 2005. And since then, the humanitarian needs have really tenfolded. They're 10 times as big now. And what we're seeing this year is that needs continue to go up following COVID, following the Ukraine war. Complexities are going up. Instability is more severe. The cost of our operations are going up. So it's really a challenging humanitarian environment out there. We're expecting this year some 345 million people that don't know what they're going to eat the next day, that are going hungry. And this is driven by protracted crises that continue in Afghanistan, Yemen, Syria, and other places, but also by new crises like Sudan, and now the crisis that we see in the Sahel region. And it's compounded by climate change. This is very clear. I just recently visited Syria, where drought-like conditions are driving up the already existing humanitarian needs. And the same in Afghanistan, where we have had 3 consecutive years of drought now, again compounding the already existing extremely difficult humanitarian situation. So really an exceptional humanitarian situation out there.
You mentioned the Sahel. Could you help us understand how difficult it is when there are military coups, when there are just enormous obstacles that probably stop you doing your work? How do you get around that?
Well, I think the most immediate issue for us in Niger at the moment is to have functioning humanitarian exemptions. It's widely known that we have had lots of trucks in Benin on their way to Niger to address humanitarian needs among the most vulnerable, the IDPs, that has not been able to enter. We are in close touch with the governments of the region and the authorities in Niger to try to solve that issue, but we so far haven't been able to do so. I think in Niger we're also worried about the freezing of development assistance and what that will have in terms of adding to the humanitarian situation. And so we are actively discussing on how we can facilitate so that some of these development efforts can continue to address the most vulnerable needs. Yeah.
Just last week, the World Food Programme issued a stark warning that it's facing a historic funding crisis at a time when, as you say, hunger is reaching record levels. Can you just give us a snapshot of what we're looking at here and what would happen if we fail to address this funding shortfall?
Yeah, again, I think this is quite historic because, as I explained, the needs continue to go up. The costs of doing business is going up. At the same time, our funding is coming down. You know, many years we've said that funding is not keeping pace of the increase of needs. But right now we have a situation where needs are going up and funding is actually going down. And that's across the board. And the forecasts for 24 look even more dire. So we are now facing serious cuts in all our operations. I recently visited Syria, where we have, you know, half our rations, but also now are cutting millions of beneficiaries in our support programs. It's really heartbreaking meeting with women in Homs, a city that, as we all know, has been completely bombed out, who told me that, frankly, it was better during the war. The bombs were dropping on them, but they had food, and the world cared. Or when I was in Afghanistan a few weeks ago, meeting with women who we have to cut off our lists, who were telling me that they just couldn't bear going back to face their children not coming back with any food, to go to sleep without eating another night. And so there are real human stories behind all these numbers that we're throwing out. In Afghanistan, we moved from some 13 million people that we were assisting in December, and we're now down to 3. So that's 10 million people off. And behind every number there is a personal tragedy. So we really need to step up. In Afghanistan, it's urgent. The winter is coming soon. And people will die in Afghanistan unless we manage to step up. And that's quite dramatic, I would say, that we know that children will die of hunger in 2023 unless we act.
So you have to literally choose between countries at times. What criteria do you use when you realize you only have a certain pot of money and you have all these crises to address? What sort of discussions take place?
We are going through quite some rigorous prioritization discussions, but not all of this is in our hands because we're donor funded, and so some donors are targeting specific countries and specific programs. But we are doing discussions such as, do we cut our rations or do we cut our number of beneficiaries? And maybe when we reach a bottom, let's say that 50% of needed rations is what we deliver, we feel that we can't go below that. So then we begin to cut beneficiaries. But these are terribly difficult decisions to make. You know, when I met with our staff in Afghanistan, our women's staff, who are going through the toughest of times, as you can imagine, also in a private way, but they were telling us that, you know, that is nothing compared to the frustration of meeting these women and the fear and the desperation that they meet when they're having to tell women that we no longer have the money to assist them. That's putting enormous strain on our staff, who are already working in the most dangerous places and going through the most challenging environments. But this is the reality. And I wish I could somehow bring that sense of desperation and fear that you get in those rooms, meeting with those women that we have now to cut assistance to these rooms, to get the attention we need to deliver for them and to be able to raise the attention and the funding that we need to continue.
That leads me into the question about your activities this week here at UN headquarters in New York. How does it work? There is so much on the agenda, the Ukraine war, climate change, obviously huge topics. Just sort of walk us through your week. Who do you meet with? How do you try and raise this issue and keep it on the agenda? And do you get specific pledges at a meeting like this?
I mean, for us, number one is to put our issues on the agenda, put hunger on the agenda. And this is important in all the summits of the week. The SDG summit today, I mean, we cannot only be addressing the humanitarian needs, we also need to find solutions and push back on these needs. And we do that a lot through resilience work, through our school feeding programs. And so it's important for us at this SDG summit to put those issues on the agenda. The climate high-level meeting is also important. I mean, we need to be more active in climate adaptation, using our presence throughout conflict and fragile affected states. And so that's another important agenda. And then, of course, the high-level week itself, to really put hunger at the top of this agenda. Then I think this week is always important for multilateralism as such. There are deep divisions around the world. Hopefully this week, having leaders meet, kind of, you know, begin to address some of those divisions. And, you know, for all the polarizing politics and all the divisions out there, you know, from WFP, we hope that at least there is one thing that leaders can agree on, and that's that children should not starve in 2023. And that's really the focus for us this week.
So I'll just end with a reference to 2030 and the SDG number 2, end global hunger. How realistic? You know, how do you maintain your optimism? And, you know, what will it take to transmit what seems a simple and heart-rending message to the world that this is not acceptable in this day and age?
Well, you know, I'm an optimist, but indeed it's tough times out there. I think from WFP we are focusing on 3 baskets of issues. One is to raise the money that we need to deliver our program, and here we are tapping into every opportunity we can beyond the traditional donor base that we have traditionally had. The second is to make sure that we tap every possible efficiency so that we get further for every dollar, euro, or whatever currency that we manage to mobilize. And this is now top priority for us, to make sure that we get further on the resources that we have. And thirdly is really to contribute to solutions, to push back on these needs, to prevent new ones from arising. And this includes working more in the development area, on resilience, on climate adaptation, on social protection. WFP will continue to be an active partner in those fields and remain committed to reach the SDG, including goal number 2.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Skau. Thank you.
Thank you.